So I want to take some time to talk about beef and then pork and then poultry specifically. So we're going to start with beef. This is a diagram of all of the wholesale cuts of beef. Okay, so you've got your chuck, your brisket, your shank, rib, short plate, flank, short loin, sirloin, rump, and round. This is just another diagram of essentially the same thing. But the animal is processed first into wholesale cuts. And there's a difference in cuts. Okay, so you have high value cuts and low value cuts. High value cuts are those that are going to bring in more money. These are typically your more tender pieces of meat. These are the ones that you're going to get served in fancy restaurants, that sort of thing. And then your low value cuts are going to be things that, like, for example, they might process into ground beef or something like that. So your high value cuts for the beef is the loin, rib, round, and rump. And the way that I remember this is that there's 4 high value cuts. One starts with an L, and the rest of them start with an R. And then your low value cuts are the chuck, the brisket, the flank, the plate or navel, and the shank. So as far as retail cuts go, there's a ton of them. Okay, there's a lot. But these are the ones that you're responsible for. So you need to know the ribeye, the tenderloin, the sirloin, the rump, and the T-bone. And those are all your high value retail cuts that you're responsible for. The ribeye comes from the rib, tenderloin from the loin, sirloin from the loin, the rump from the rump, and the T-bone from the loin as well. Most of these are pretty easy to figure out. I mean, the ribeye comes from the rib, tenderloin comes from the loin. The only one that's a little bit funky is that T-bone. So you got to know that T-bone comes from the loin. And then as far as low value retail cuts that you're responsible for, stew beef, ground beef, cube steak, and brisket are going to be the low value retail cuts that you need to know. You don't need to know where they come from. So remember when I said that there was a lot of retail cuts of beef? This is what I'm talking about. There's a ton of retail cuts of beef. Okay, this diagram basically shows you everything. You don't have to know this, don't worry, but this is kind of a for your exploration chart. So this is what your ribeye looks like. You can definitely find this in the grocery store. An example of the tenderloin. It looks similar to a tenderloin from a pig, so a pork tenderloin, except it's significantly bigger because it comes from a cow as opposed to a pig. Here's your sirloin. This is honestly my favorite cut of beef to eat. There's your rump. And there's your T-bone. It is so named because this is actually bone, and it makes a T. And then here are your low-value cuts. So your ground beef, your cube steak, stew beef, and your brisket. We'll cover cuts of pork in the next video.